The hiss of steam filled the narrow shop, wrapping the air in heat and detergent. James Carter moved like a machine built of patience, hands steady, eyes calm, never in a hurry. He spent his days beneath flickering bulbs, pressing creases sharp as razors into uniforms that didn't belong to him. Soldiers came and went, young men laughing, buttons gleaming, their collars still warm from his iron. They spoke of training camps, of ships and planes and distant lands he had only seen on maps pinned to the wall. James listened quietly, offering a smile, never asking questions. Outside, the town was changing. Posters lined the street, "Enlist today," and radios buzzed with talk of Europe burning. Every week, another face disappeared from the neighborhood, replaced by silence and worry. In the evenings, James sat by the window of his small rented room, watching trains rumble west with soldiers waving from the cars. He often wondered if anyone ever noticed the man who made them look sharp for their departure. There was pride in his work, even if few saw it. The smell of starch, the smooth slide of cotton beneath his palms. It gave him peace. He knew how to remove bloodstains, mend torn sleeves, and restore dignity to a uniform beaten by use. But beneath that rhythm lay a quiet irony. Every shirt he cleaned, every jacket he folded, was a promise that others would fight while he stayed behind. On Sundays, he walked past the Army recruiting office. The sergeant inside always greeted him, half joking, half serious. "We could use strong arms like yours, Carter." James would tip his cap and reply softly, "These arms were made for washing, sir, not for war." He didn't know it then, but fate was already writing a different order, one that would turn his humble trade into legend. The letter came on a Tuesday morning, tucked beneath a stack of freshly pressed uniforms. The envelope was thin, official, stamped with an eagle and the words "Selective Service System." James stared at it for a long while before opening it, the hiss of his iron still echoing behind him. The paper trembled slightly in his hands as he read the order, summoning him to report for duty. For the first time in his life, the laundryman had been chosen not to clean the stains of war, but to face them himself. Training camp was a world apart from the quiet shop in Texas. Orders barked through megaphones, boots pounded the dirt, and every dawn began with the same cruel whistle. The men cursed, stumbled, and laughed through exhaustion, but James struggled in silence. His hands were skilled with cloth, not rifles. He moved slower than the others, unsure of himself amid the chaos of drills and commands. Yet while others grumbled through their chores, James worked, steady, deliberate, dependable. When the barracks filled with dirty uniforms and broken buttons, it was James who stayed awake long after lights out, sewing, scrubbing, folding. Soon, the men began to leave small bundles by his cot, shirts to fix, trousers to patch, boots to shine. He never asked for thanks, yet appreciation grew quietly around him. "Carter keeps us looking like soldiers," one recruit said. "Man's got magic hands." In time, even the drill sergeant noticed. "Carter," he grunted one morning, inspecting the spotless bunks. "You might not win a foot race, but you sure can make a squad look ready for inspection." James nodded, saying little, pride flickering behind his calm eyes. When assignments were posted, most men prayed for combat roles or flight training. James's name appeared beside the word "Support Crew, Pacific Fleet." He folded the notice neatly into his pocket. He didn't cheer or complain, only packed his kit, cleaned his boots, and whispered a small prayer. The man who had spent his life washing away the dirt of others was now sailing toward a war that no one could clean. Morning broke soft and golden over Pearl Harbor. The water shimmered like polished glass, mirroring the white hulls of battleships resting in quiet rows. Palm trees swayed in the distance, and gulls traced lazy circles in the sky. A gentle breeze carried the smell of salt, oil, and coffee from the galley. It was Sunday, November 7th, 1941, a day that seemed too peaceful to belong to war. On the deck of the USS Westlake, sailors laughed and traded jokes, their voices drifting over the harbor. Some wrote letters home, others polished brass, or leaned against the railing to watch the morning sun lift above the horizon. Music played faintly from a radio, and for a moment, the Pacific felt like paradise. Blue, endless, forgiving. No one imagined it could turn cruel. Below deck, in the narrow laundry hold, James Carter worked quietly as steam curled around him. He pressed a white officer's jacket, his iron gliding rhythmically over the fabric. Every crease had to be perfect. He hummed to himself, lost in the small comfort of routine. The hiss of the iron, the drip of water, the steady heartbeat of the ship's engines far below. A few sailors stopped by the laundry on their way to breakfast, teasing him about his devotion to spotless uniforms. "You missed your calling, Carter," one said with a grin. "You should have run a hotel instead of joined the Navy." James smiled faintly, not looking up from his work. "Clean's clean, no matter where you are," he replied. Through the porthole, sunlight broke in thin beams, lighting the steam like strands of gold. Somewhere above, a bell rang out across the ship, its sound light almost cheerful. It was an ordinary morning, perhaps the most ordinary he'd ever known. And yet, beneath that calm surface, fate was already gathering in the clouds beyond the horizon. Within an hour, the sky that looked so peaceful would rain fire, and the laundryman's hands, meant for pressing uniforms, would find themselves gripping the cold steel of a gun. The first blast came like the sky had split in two, a deep, rolling thunder that shook the hull from bow to stern. The deck groaned, lights flickered, and somewhere above, men began to scream. James Carter froze mid-motion, the iron still hissing in his hand. Then another explosion, closer this time, so violent it hurled him against the wall. Steam burst from a ruptured pipe, filling the laundry hold with a choking fog. At first, he thought it was an accident in the engine room, but then came the sirens, wild, rising, endless. Air raid, air raid. The words echoed through the corridors. Carter dropped everything and ran. The narrow passageways were already filling with smoke and shouting. Men stumbled past, half-dressed, pulling on helmets, gripping rifles, eyes wide with disbelief. Somewhere above them, the muffled roar of engines and the metallic hammer of machine gun fire tore through the air. He reached the stairwell just as another shockwave rippled through the ship. The floor buckled beneath his feet, and a burst of seawater gushed in through the seams. Carter grabbed a young sailor sprawled in the corridor, blood running down his forehead. "Can you stand?" he yelled. The boy nodded weakly. Together they staggered toward the ladder, the water rising to their knees, oil slicking their boots. The smell was unbearable, smoke, diesel, burning paint. Through the haze he could hear orders being shouted, the clang of metal doors sealing off compartments, the distant boom of anti-aircraft guns firing blind into the sky. Carter hauled another man out from behind a fallen locker, ignoring the shrapnel that sliced his sleeve. He didn't think, he just moved, one man at a time, one step closer to daylight. When he finally reached the upper deck, the world had turned red. Fire rolled across the harbor. Black columns of smoke clawed at the sun. Planes dove and twisted overhead, their engines howling. Nearby ships burned, listing like wounded beasts. On the Westlake, sailors ran in every direction, shouting for medics, for water, for help. Carter pulled himself over the final rung, gasping, his face streaked with sweat and soot. In that chaos, something inside him shifted, a spark he'd never known before. He was no longer just a laundryman who cleaned up after others. He was part of the fight now, standing in hell itself, and refusing to back away. The upper deck was a storm of fire and noise, shattered metal, flaming debris, and the sickening whine of bullets slicing through the air. The Westlake rocked under his feet as torpedoes struck nearby ships, sending geysers of seawater high into the air. Carter ducked behind a railing, coughing through the smoke, trying to make sense of the chaos. Men ran past dragging hoses, shouting orders that vanished in the roar of explosions. Then he saw it. A .50 caliber Browning machine gun bolted to the port rail, its barrel cold, its operator nowhere in sight. The gun stood silent amid the chaos, a sleeping giant waiting for someone to wake it. Without thinking, Carter rushed forward. The deck was slick with oil, his boots slipping as he reached the weapon. He hesitated for just a second. He'd never fired one before. His job was to clean, not to kill. But the thought was gone as quickly as it came. Above him, another wave of planes screamed in low, their bombs already falling. He grabbed the grips, pulled back the charging handle, and squeezed the trigger. The Browning erupted to life, the recoil pounding his arms like a jackhammer. Brass casings spilled at his feet, tinkling against the metal deck. The noise was deafening, the barrel glowing red, the air thick with smoke and burning fuel. He aimed by instinct, tracing the silver silhouettes of dive bombers as they slashed across the sky. Each burst of gunfire tore through the air, like anger made visible. All around him, sailors shouted encouragement, some throwing him belts of ammunition as others took cover behind wreckage. One yelled, "Give him hell, Carter!" And for the first time, he answered not with words, but with fire. The vibration of the gun rattled his teeth. His heart pounded with something that felt like fury and purpose all at once. He wasn't sure if he hit anything, only that he couldn't stop. Sweat stung his eyes, his ears rang, his hands ached, but he kept firing until the feed ran dry. When the gun finally fell silent, his shoulders trembled. Around him, the world still burned, but inside him, something had changed forever. The man who had once pressed the creases of officers' uniforms was gone. In his place stood a defender, forged in smoke, noise, and fire. The air reeked of burning oil and blood. All around, the deck was alive with flame, men shouting, hoses hissing, explosions rolling one after another. Carter's body trembled from the gun's recoil, his uniform blackened with soot, his throat raw from smoke. He paused only when a shout cut through the noise. The captain had been hit. Captain Bennion lay slumped near the conning tower, his white cap streaked red. Splinters of steel had torn through his side. Two sailors tried to lift him, but the blast that followed sent them sprawling. Without hesitation, Carter sprinted through the smoke, ducking flying debris. He dropped to his knees beside the captain, whose breath came in short, sharp gasps. "Hold on, sir," Carter said, his voice hoarse. He slid his arms under the man's shoulders and hoisted him up, muscles screaming under the weight. Bullets whined overhead. Metal screamed as another bomb tore through the deck. Step by step, Carter carried his captain toward the shelter of a damaged bulkhead. The man was fading fast, but still tried to speak. "The guns," he murmured. "Don't let them stop." Carter nodded once, lowering him carefully behind the conning tower where the medics could reach. Then, without a word, he turned back into the fire. The .50 caliber still waited for him. Half melted, smoking, surrounded by shell casings that shimmered like gold in the flames. He slammed a new belt of ammunition into place, set his feet, and opened fire again. The roar of the Browning merged with the chaos around him until it became a single, endless sound. He no longer flinched when bombs fell close. He barely noticed the fragments slicing past. His face was blank, eyes fixed on the sky, body moving with the precision of a machine. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The gun overheated, jammed, screamed as it cooled, and fired again. Every muscle in his arms burned, but he didn't stop until the last round clicked empty. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of flames and the groan of dying metal. Carter leaned against the railing, chest heaving, watching black smoke coil into the sky. Around him lay ruin, yet his expression remained calm. Cold, steady, carved from iron and resolve. The laundryman had vanished completely. What stood there now was something the war had forged in fire and steel. The Westlake groaned like a wounded animal. Its deck tilted sharply to port, water rushing through every torn seam. Fires raged below, licking up the bulkheads as ammunition cooked off in muffled bursts. The once proud battleship was dying, and everyone aboard knew it. Officers shouted orders to abandon ship, their voices barely rising above the thunder of collapsing metal. Lifeboats were gone, riddled with holes, or burning on the waves. Carter stood amid the wreckage, the deck hot beneath his boots. He could hear men crying out for help, trapped, burned, half drowned. He didn't hesitate. Again and again, he dove into the smoke-filled corridors, pulling sailors out one by one. Some he dragged across the deck. Others he carried on his back to the starboard side, where the water still shimmered beneath the flames. His lungs burned, his arms ached, but he couldn't stop. The thought of leaving someone behind was worse than the fire itself. "Carter, that's an order! Get off the ship!" someone yelled. He didn't even look back. Another explosion ripped through the hull, throwing him against the railing. The ship began to roll. With a final glance at the flag still fluttering amid the smoke, he jumped. The ocean hit like a hammer, icy, black, and alive with fire. Burning oil spread across the surface, painting the waves in orange light. Carter came up gasping, choking on smoke, then ducked as bullets from strafing aircraft tore the water around him. He kicked hard, swimming through the flaming slicks, pushing debris aside, dragging two wounded men who could barely keep their heads above water. The heat seared his skin, the salt stung his eyes, but he kept going. One stroke after another toward the faint line of shore. Behind him, the Westlake slipped beneath the waves, its final breath a burst of steam and sparks. Carter didn't look back. He reached the beach coughing, half blind, his arms still locked around the sailors he'd saved. When they collapsed together on the sand, the first thing he saw was the rising smoke over the harbor. And for the first time, he realized he had survived. When the smoke finally cleared, Pearl Harbor was unrecognizable. The water that had once glimmered blue was now black with oil and ash. Ships lay on their sides like fallen giants, and the air hung heavy with the smell of metal and death. Sailors wandered the shoreline in shock, calling out for friends who would never answer. Among them was James Carter, clothes torn, hands blistered, eyes hollow from exhaustion. He didn't speak much in the days that followed. He helped where he could, moving wreckage, hauling stretchers, and standing quietly in the long lines for a roll call. His name was marked present, though many around him were not. In the weeks after the attack, officers began to gather accounts of what had happened on the Westlake. Stories spread of a laundryman who carried his captain through fire, who manned a gun alone, who refused to leave his ship until everyone else was safe. At first, Carter didn't believe they meant him. "I just did my job," he told an ensign who tried to thank him. "Same as anyone would." But word traveled fast, reaching command, and soon his name was known far beyond the smoking harbor. Months later, aboard the aircraft carrier Enterprise, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz himself pinned the Navy Cross to Carter's chest. The ceremony was brief, without fanfare. The admiral's words were steady, but heavy with meaning. "This marks the first time such honor has been given in the Pacific Fleet to a man of your rank and race," he said. "I trust it will not be the last." Carter stood at attention, eyes forward, saying nothing. Cameras clicked, sailors applauded. But his face remained calm, unreadable, the same quiet dignity that had carried him through that morning of fire. When it was over, he folded the medal into his pocket and went back to work below deck. To him, heroism wasn't something to celebrate. It was something that happened when there was no other choice. Despite the medal and the stories that now followed his name, James Carter never grew comfortable with being called a hero. When others tried to praise him, he would smile faintly and change the subject. The Navy offered him safer postings, but he refused them all. "A ship's still a ship," he said simply, "and work's still work." So when orders came for a new assignment aboard the escort carrier Laundryman Bay, he packed his sea bag without complaint. The men aboard the carrier welcomed him as a living legend, yet Carter treated them no differently than he had anyone else. Mending uniforms, keeping things tidy, sharing quiet jokes over late-night coffee in the galley. He still carried himself like the laundryman he had once been, never above any task. When a young sailor apologized for tracking mud through the corridor, Carter only chuckled. "Don't worry," he said. "If they'll let me fire their guns, maybe now they'll let me wash my own clothes." It was the closest he came to bragging. As the Laundryman Bay steamed toward the Gilbert Islands in November 1943, Carter wrote a letter home to his mother. He told her not to worry, that the war would end soon, that he'd be home for Thanksgiving in 1945. He asked her to keep his medal safe in a drawer somewhere, said it looked better resting than shining. But just before dawn, on November 24th, fate caught up to him. A Japanese submarine fired a torpedo that struck the carrier's magazine dead center. In an instant, the ship erupted. Fire and steel tearing skyward, the blast splitting her clean in half. Those near the deck were hurled into the sea. Those below never had a chance. Out of more than 900 aboard, only a few hundred survived. James Carter was not among them. There was no body to bury, no grave to mark. Only a name carried in the memories of the men who had seen him stand against fire and never flinch. In the years that followed, James Carter's story traveled farther than any ship he'd ever served on. Newspapers printed his name beside words like valor and sacrifice. Painters captured his calm expression behind the gun, the smoke rising around him like a halo. A recruiting poster showed his portrait under the words, "Above and beyond the call of duty." The quiet laundryman immortalized as a symbol of courage itself. For many, he became proof that heroism was not born in ranks or medals, but in the small, unshakable decisions made when the world is burning. Schools told his story, parents repeated it to their children, and sailors carried his memory across the oceans he once crossed. Even those who never knew his face spoke of the man who kept fighting, a reminder that greatness can rise from anywhere, from a cotton press in Texas, from the lower decks of a battleship, from hands meant for gentleness that found themselves holding a weapon. Decades later, the sea still kept his body, but not his legacy. It lived in the Navy Cross that hung in a museum, in the faded photograph of a man standing beside an iron gun, and in the silence that follows the word bravery. The world would build monuments to generals and admirals, but Carter's monument was simpler. The memory of a man who refused to run, who fought without expectation, and who never claimed the title history gave him. He had set out to wash the uniforms of other men's wars. Instead, he became one of the few who reminded the world what courage really looks like. Quiet, steady, and utterly human. The laundryman who went to war had, in the end, become the measure of it.